Okay, well, it gives me huge pleasure after a long time of trying to get this podcast organized, I think, Mark, to have you join us on the podcast. And for the benefit of our listeners, just briefly, Mark, if you don't mind, I'll just set a bit of the scene and then I'll hand over to you to sort of do a short
Please, thanks,
introduction.
Philip.
Yeah, but Mark reached out to me many months ago now. To take part in his podcast. And it kind of started off a relationship which is sort of grown across the Atlantic Ocean, I think, now over a number of months. And for me, it's been an absolute pleasure to find someone who is, I would say, so like minded. So Mark is based in Canada. He runs a sales consulting practice called In the Funnel. He also is the author of a new book, and this is the primary reason why we've invited Mark to come and talk us about the book. How did it come about, and so on. Book about selling, which I think is brilliant, by the way.
Well, thank you, Phil.
And Mark also runs a very, very successful podcast channel as well. So I'd like to talk about that if we can. But before we get started, Mark, I wonder if you'd just like to introduce yourself to us all and give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, first of all, Philip, thank you so much for that gracious introduction. And I'm so excited to be on the podcast today. As you know, I've been a fan of yours now. It's actually coming up on years.
Right.
And I so enjoyed our podcast when we talked about selling transformed, your amazing book, which I always love the history. It's so academic at the beginning, the history of selling along the Silk Road. I didn't know that. I just loved it. Such a great read. But most of my career, Phil, was spent running large sales organizations and outsourcing companies or technology companies. So very big, very corporate. And in many of those cases, I was fortunate to be a part of very large deals, multi-million dollar deals, in one case, $1 billion deal. And I then spent a little bit of time turning around some underperforming sales organizations. And I was going into businesses where I didn't really understand the business so much. I understood selling a little bit and sales leadership,
Yeah.
but I'd go into whether it's a technology company or other and figure out kind of a playbook to help elevate sales performance in a short period of time. So that led to starting in the funnel, boy, 10 years ago now. And so I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. But at the core, we're a sales training organization. And more importantly, on the personal front, I'm certainly, big on friends and family, my lovely wife, Donna. And my interests include music and
I,
athletics.
I have
Yeah.
I've not so much seen the athletics, but I've certainly enjoyed a couple of the clips you've shown of you behind the drums.
Oh, thanks. So I'm still hoping one day, I become that rock star. I still think I have time to make that happen, but
Yeah.
uh, but just
Just
love
on
it.
a complete aside, Mark, if we can, on the music side, I was at which connects athletics actually to music quite nicely. I was at a charity event in someone's home, not far from here, and the person who owned the home is a chap called Alan Pascoe, who is a medal winner hurdler.
Wow.
And so he's really big into athletics, and he then started up his own PR practice um, called Fast Track. And at one point, he was one of the
Nice.
most wealthiest men in the UK rich list, so enormously successful.
Wow.
And anyway, this house that he had bought was quite close to the house that I used to live in, and since moving out here more into the country, but it's actually where David Gilmour lived of Pink
You're
Floyd.
kidding.
And and
Pink Floyd.
one of my most favorite albums is A Brick in the Wall. And
Oh,
the brick
great.
in the wall was in the house. It was the bricks there, and the artwork on that album comes from
Wow.
the place that I was at, and of course I've taken a photograph of it because I absolutely love Pink Floyd. and so I,
Wow.
athletics with music, you see. Now we weren't going to talk about this, where we weren't going to go into
This will be another podcast, but
it's a bit,
huge fan of Pink Floyd.
yeah.
And my lovely wife Donna has recently started the guitar, taking guitar lessons.
Wow.
And one of the first songs she's been learning is Comfortably Numb. So
Okay.
I hear it random afternoons when I'm working from home.
That's
I'm going to
fantastic.
hear Comfortably Numb on the guitar. Totally love it.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, that wasn't expected, Mark, but the connection I just couldn't resist, as it's
That's why
such
it's so
a
great.
anyway. So okay, so clearly a very experienced background in sales, and can I just ask what prompted you to leave the corporate life and set up your own practice, your own business?
Yeah, what a great question. So it's hard to do that because, as you know, when you're in the corporate world, there's some handcuffs on you in certain different ways. So what had happened, Phil, was I'd been part of an organization for a number of years, and I'd sort of been on a little bit, perhaps, of a fast track, and maybe at some point in time been identified as somebody who might lead that company. But it came to an end. There was board made a decision, and there was a change in strategic direction. Now I'm out. And
Yeah,
so then I ended up taking a role with a large enterprise software company, kind of turning around underperforming parts
yeah,
of the sales organization, which was great, but I was traveling all the time.
okay,
And so after about 18 months or so of doing that, I realized I've got to stop traveling. Like it was 3 to 4 nights every week for months on end. And so as I was searching for kind of another sales leadership job, where I was thinking maybe a large American company that was selling into big Canadian banks might need leadership. A few companies came to me and people on the boards of those companies and said, "Listen, we can't really afford to attract you, but why don't you come in and just help us for a while you're looking for your next senior role?"
yeah,
And I think this happens to a lot of, sales leaders at some point. So before I knew what was happening, Philip, I was really into three different companies: a software company, a financial services business, a second software company. And I was interviewing with a very large technology company to lead their Canadian operations. So I
yeah,
was going to go back to this corporate world. And it was an amazing kind of coincidence. One day I'm in downtown Toronto working with one of these smaller firms. They're called PureFacts, still a client today, 10 years later. And I said, "Hey guys, got to leave. I've got an interview." They knew what I was doing. So I got an interview and it was literally two doors down. I walked out the door, went to this interview. It was maybe the fifth or sixth interview. I think I was in a room getting interviewed by five or six people. It was kind of disorganized. But I was feeling pretty good that I might, be moving forward with this thing. And right in the middle of the interview, like 90 minutes in, I had this epiphany that I would rather go back and work with PureFacts than
right,
continue on and take over this company.
okay,
And so I just left, walked out the door, went to a coffee shop, and built a little business plan for in the funnel, and then called again my wife Donna and said, "Hey, I don't think I'm going to work for anybody anymore. What do you think if we start this business?" And without even a breath, she said, "Do it. You'll be happier. I've always thought you're kind of an entrepreneur." And she was, as our spouses tend to be, she was absolutely right. And it's just been fantastic for the last 10 years.
that's I know it's not easy. It's not easy to make that jump,
Right.
and it takes a lot of courage, and it takes an ability to be able to deal with certainly to work without the security of working for a large corporate. You mean you live or die, by
Right.
by your best efforts. Yeah, but I mean, for me, it was slightly easier. I took the decision a bit earlier in my career, yeah, I sort of always knew I wanted to run my own company. So that for me in
Nice.
my early 20s was a sort of segue. into what's now become Consalia, which is quite interesting. Okay,
Well,
so that's the history. So I've always thought that you would write a book, Mark, because through your podcast series, you have been interviewing some of, the top kind of thought leaders, I would say, in sales. And I must admit, I was thinking, when is Mark going to write his book? Because you really, you have access to not only your rich experience and background, but you've also got access to people. And like you say on your podcasts, you learn a lot from the people that you interview
so
as
much.
well. And so, when you said that you were going to publish your own book, I thought, great, I can't wait. I can't wait to read it, because I knew
Well,
it
thank
would
you.
it would be great. So we're here to talk about, I think, principally about Mark's book, which is coming out. So Mark, the title of this book, I also love the title. You've got love in the title. Learn to Love Selling. And I'm sure it took you a while to come up with the title. It took me a long time to come up with mine. So could you just, you know, why this title? What made you give it that title?
Maybe two or three things. And by the way, thank you so much for all the gracious comments, Philip. So I'm part of a entrepreneurial organization. So as a sales coach and trainer, I also need coaching and training, and I believe in coaching. So I'm part of an organization called Strategic Coach, excuse me, which is the largest entrepreneurial coaching organization in the world for
Okay.
successful growth oriented entrepreneurs. And the core title came originally when I was in one of those workshops and I was, speaking with a peer who actually ran a very, very large painting company in Chicago, a massive industrial painting company in Chicago. And when we were talking about the book, he actually came up with it and said, you should call this Learn to Love Selling because most entrepreneurs, really don't like selling or the concept of selling. And I think they don't like it because of this 50, 60-year-old stereotype of what selling is, which is
Yeah.
completely devoid of any reality today. And then, Phil, the second part would be, with all of the folks we've trained, the thousands of salespeople we've actually trained, this may resonate a little with you. Many of us fell into sales.
Hmm.
So we go to college, we go to university. We're not on a professional designation like accounting or law, or we didn't do our MBA as an undergraduate. And then you come out and, a lot of people end up defaulting into sales. And my experience was those people as well had this dated impression of what selling really was because no one teaches much about you're doing amazing work in the UK, but still in North America, many MBA schools don't teach anything about selling. And so it's viewed as this trade or this thing.
Yeah.
And they weren't that happy. And many of these folks that we train in, I think the second thing that adds a little bit of almost sadness to it is they don't know what to do because not everybody's getting trained. There's informal process and methodologies in many cases. So this lack of control about their future leads to unhappiness or stress or mental health issues. So the idea here what is, first of all, I just obviously love this because selling is just about helping a client achieve a desired business outcome. I actually love helping people. So that's really what I was trying to get across in this title. That A, it's a profession, but B, you can actually love and be proud of this profession, but you need to treat it like a profession. And of course, you're just doing amazing work in the UK with Consalia to actually identify professional sales as a formal profession, which is why I was so keen to interview you after reading your book the first time around a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, I think you raise, such a good point. And I must admit, I'm slightly surprised at your comments about America, because I've always thought that America was ahead of the curve a little bit in this. There's a lot more respect for the profession of sales.
Right.
Uh, but it's interesting. Just earlier this week, I was involved in a panel discussion with a company in the oil business, and they'd got their leaders from all over the world coming together. And we were talking about selling because they have a lot of people who come from a technical background, in that sector, but yet have to take up fairly senior sales roles. And they were asking the question. They asked the question, what can we do to try and get more of a sales mindset, into some of these people who come into sales from a technical background. And before I answered that question, I asked the group. There were about 40 people there, so it's quite a big event. I said, "How do you see sales? Do you see sales as
Right.
a function, or do you see sales as a philosophy?" And it was interesting. So I asked them to think about it for a bit, and then I asked them, for a show of hands. And what kind of surprised me, and perhaps I'm surprised because of my own bias.
Yeah, right.
I was surprised that half the room saw sales as a function and half of them saw it as a philosophy.
Hmm.
For me, sales is a philosophy. It's not a function. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of doing things. And the point you've just made, about the sort of connotations around the word selling, I think is
Yes.
unfortunate, but it is very real. I think we just got to accept, that there is a stigma, and it's going to take some time, I think, before people really start to appreciate that actually we all sell. Doesn't matter whether we're in the accounts department or whether we're in frontline sales, we all sell. It's about, a lot of it's about relationships and problem solving, Mark, just like you said. So it's just everyday communication.
We all sell. And so one of our favorite authors, in addition to you, Phil, is Daniel Pink.
Yeah,
And again, same thing. About 13 years ago, he wrote "To Sell Is Human." He doesn't have a background in sales.
yeah,
He was Al Gore's speechwriter, years and years ago. He's just a great researcher and writer. And when he was on the Selling Well podcast, right at the end, I said, "What caused you to write this book? I mean, you're not from sales. Why'd you do it?" It's one of our favorite books. And he said that the gap, or the difference between the age old stereotype of a salesperson and what he knew from some of his friends and peers being, naturally curious, intellectually inquisitive, problem solvers, smart, business focused people. He said it was completely devoid of reality, this old stereotype. So he wanted to do a deep dive.
yeah,
And it's so interesting because what he does is he writes the book and he's talking about the last Fuller Brush person selling in the world. And Fuller Brush, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, was one of the biggest sales companies in the world. They'd sell cleaning supplies door to door. Such a great storyline. But I believe the same thing that you believe, that selling today is really management consulting for the most part.
yes,
And I really believe that for the people out there doing this, and in the US, 1 in 9 people in a professional sales job, that excludes entrepreneurs or lawyers or accountants or consultants who all have to drive revenue for a living.
yeah,
But so many people are doing it. And I just think there's this opportunity to understand it's really management consulting and enjoy it, and
yeah,
then we'll be better at it, and the clients and prospects will feel it, which kind of aligns with your book, with Selling Transform, saying you've got an aligned value system.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think there's just this massive opportunity, and I just love interacting with people like you to have this kind of conversation,
yeah,
because at the end of the day, I do actually want to try, we all of us are trying to improve the lives of professional salespeople. That's where I think that the end game is.
yeah. So again, let's come back to the book, and we talked about the title and who is the target audience for the book.
Yeah, target audience would be sales leaders, professional salespeople, or entrepreneurs. So those are the three folks who've sort of embraced these concepts most in terms of our training out there today.
Okay.
So really, it's anybody who's required to drive revenue for their business.
Right. So quite a broad is quite, quite a broad
Yes,
reach. And um, what I've loved about your book is the and I I wrote to you about this as well. It
thank you.
You describe it as a playbook. Yeah, you describe it as a book that you could pick up, and whether you're sort of planning for a meeting or whether you're going through the qualification stage of a call, that there are very, very practical things in the book which you can use a QR code and you could download, different tools
Yeah,
and things you can actually,
right.
which I think is just a great idea. But so do you want to talk us through a little bit the way in which you structured the book and what you hope people will get out of it from reading it?
Perfect. And by the way, Philip, thank you so much for the amazing testimonial. So, folks, when you read the book, you're going to see a great testimonial from Phil right at the start, and it was so great and gracious, and it really did mean a lot to me, Phil, given the source. So, thank you very much for that. One of the things over the last 10 years that we really sort of identified and noted, and as you know, I love you know, many of the amazing, there's literally hundreds of fantastic books out there today on professional selling. So
Yeah,
before we started writing ours, it was, hey, what's needed? Because there's so many, we point people toward our network of other great authors because there's so many good things out there. And one of the things we noticed, Phil, was most salespeople may have great skills or capabilities, but in general, one of the challenges we were seeing is they don't have an overall game plan on a monthly or quarter or annual basis to say, okay, what specifically are the things I'm going to focus in on to convert whatever business capability that firm has into revenue? And it's very easy to get caught up into just doing things without taking a pause and say, what are the 4 or 5 things I need to think about to maximize sales productivity? So given the only limitation on a salesperson is time, how do I maximize sales productivity with all these philosophies and concepts and ideas out there? What do I do? So we boiled it down over 10 years into this core sales playbook. And we think there's these 4 things you need to do to convert your core capability into revenue. And they're a little bit serial and linear, meaning you need to think of these in order. The first, before we ever speak to a client or a prospect, we have to understand the value proposition for our business to our market.
mm,
So, and value propositions is 3-legged stool of what do you do? How does what you do tie to their desired business outcome? What are you going to do for them? And then the third leg of the stool is competitive differentiation. What's unique and different about you, given the other options in the marketplace?
yeah,
And you've speak a little bit to competitive differentiation in your book with the referencing of Julian Birkinshaw.
yeah,
The second thing we need to do is, if I understand my value proposition, I have to prioritize the pursuit of my target market. This is a real challenge for professional salespeople. So start with understanding who's our ideal client profile. Who do we want as a client? And then how do I build pipeline of those types of clients by either growing share of my existing clients or new logos, as we call them. So,
yeah,
so thinking about that, creating the list. Then I've got to initiate demand. I have to prospect. So kind of the X factor of most professional sales today, 75% of salespeople, account managers, they don't prospect and they can't prospect using modern sales techniques, but we have to be able to fill top of funnel. And then finally, I've got to execute. I've got to understand sales process, sales strategy, and then funnel management. So we tried to simplify these things so anybody out there today regardless of their level of skill and knowledge, they could take the playbook and say, based on where I am for the next period, let me think about these four things, and I can build my sales plan to knock the ball out of the park. And then we do get a little tactical on many things in terms of how to do these things.
Yeah.
But really, the playbook is the what you should be doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You start talking about in your book about the value proposition, and yes, I couldn't agree with you more. And again, from personal experience, when we formed Consalia in 2006, it was a joint venture company between a Spanish company, an Italian, and a British company. So that's where it was.
Oh,
And our kind of raison d'etre, if you like, was to be able to provide services to our clients anywhere in the world and deliver programs in different languages, which was something that we were doing together anyway, um, but not through a joint venture entity. And then, so that was the purpose. But it radically changed when we began to realize, probably 5 years afterwards, or maybe less now, 4 years afterwards, that actually what our purpose was, it was to help make sales the world's most sought after profession.
amazing.
And it was such a huge pivotal moment because we were trying to get our head around this idea about who are we and what are we. And of course, once you stumble upon that deep sense of purpose, so many other things fall into play. And,
Yes.
in a sense, you could say that we were being a slightly disruptor in the marketplace because we were heading in a direction that no one else was going in. It was fairly tough, but it was, we in the early days driven by the strong belief that we felt that this is where we wanted to go. But it affects so much of what you do in terms of the personas that you need to influence, in terms of the way in which you show up and so on. And so many people I think focus on the what we do, but not the why we do things. And I
Yes.
think this is something that comes out very strongly, right at the very beginning of your book when you start to talk about purpose. And I think it's so important. And I mean, when you do your consulting work, Mark, with your clients,
Yes.
when obviously you're following very much this process and approach. What have you discovered with the clients that you are working with on this particular area? How many do you think have really thought through in detail, the why of what we're doing and what is our competitive source of differentiation?
Yes. Great question. Very few, Philip. So when we come in to help with organizations today, this is really the biggest issue is, and I think, by the way, this is on senior leadership, and for entrepreneurial firms, it's on the founder. But we need to help the sales team by creating the playbook we expect them to execute. And that doesn't mean that they can't still add their own unique ability, when they're executing their way with the things they do super well. But I think there's this confusion. And so a lot of the times when we come in, and most of what we do now is training, but there is a consulting part at the beginning to kind of better understand somebody's business and the current state before we configure our training curriculum for their business. But I think the key issue is someone may not be performing, which is very common in professional sales today, but they have no idea why, and they default to opportunity management or immediately just increasing conversion rates. And oftentimes there may be a bigger issue with saying, "Hey, we're actually reaching out to the wrong target market. These aren't the ideal clients for us. They don't value what makes us unique and different. We should stop trying to sell there. We should start to sell here." So there's a strategic component to this. And when anyone reaches out to anyone today for that first conversation,
Yeah.
I think I think we have to be prepared where whoever it is, that buyer is going to come back and say, "Hey, listen, Mark, I get a dozen emails from sales training companies every week
Yeah.
because we have a large sales organization. Why should I talk to you? What is it that makes you unique and different? If we don't have a good answer to that, we have no right to be speaking to that person.
Yeah.
But Phil, really believe that over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, a lot of times, particularly in technology organizations, there was this belief that the technology was so good it would sell itself, and all I have to do is show up and make it available. And
Yeah.
that is not true it's just not true moving forward. So
Yeah.
we got a little bit, we had it a little easy for a while. You might have been selling for Salesforce for a certain period of time where it was not that difficult.
Uh-huh.
It's difficult now. So you have to go back to this, really have a good answer to it. And then it's all those things that you talked about, in your book where you say, what values are you using to sell, whether it's authenticity or client centricity. I really need to understand who I'm reaching out to. So they go, what's unique and different about you? How are you going to help me? Because I've got a business to run or I've got a division to run. I have pressures, I have challenges. I need a really good answer to that. And first of all, it starts by really understanding that buying persona. Do I understand who I'm reaching out to? Do I have insight and value I can provide in a conversation? Am I pitching something or am I actually providing value and insight? So this value proposition, it's so funny. You think it would be self-evident for every company out
Mhm.
there. It becomes self-evident, by the way, when these companies are trying to sell themselves. Suddenly they start focusing on what the value proposition so they can communicate it to private
Yeah.
equity or a financial partner. But they're not communicating it well to their target market today, which is why they're having such a difficult time.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. Okay, so a lot of the content of your book, you quite often start off with a personal story, you know,
Yes.
right, of both successes and things you perhaps haven't succeeded at, which is
Yeah,
great.
that's right. There's a
Um,
lot of both, by the way. Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
the authenticity of how you write as well.
Well, thank
If you were looking at people that has made big influence on your approach, were there any people that you have worked with or consulted with or read about that's had a big influence, you think, on how you see sales that maybe is reflected in the book as well? Because you do speak quite highly of certain people that have had a big impact on your sales career.
Right. Well, you're absolutely right. So, and there's so many. So I will call out. I love the work of Frank Cespedes at Harvard. He's written 8 or 9 books now, and most
Yeah.
recent, Sales Management That Works: How to Sell in a World That Never Stops Changing. But 10 years ago, I loved Aligning Strategy in Sales. That was a real foundational book for me, and then started following everything that Frank did. He was one of the real thought leaders in the early days, 20, 30 years ago at Harvard for professional sales. I've always been a big fan of the straight talk of Andy Paul.
Yeah.
So you've been on his podcast a number of times.
Yeah.
That's how I originally found you,
Okay.
and that's where I found you originally. But I think he's got a very kind of almost a common sense revolution required for professional B2B sales
Yeah.
that I've been a fan of. I tip the hat for sure, Philip, to that there was that first tier of sales thought leaders in the 80s and 90s, and they came out with some very foundational work that I think today you're going to see traces of in almost everybody's work. But Miller Hyman's strategic selling, I see in almost everything I read.
Right.
So I think that was something that was just so great and pivotal at the time, and I think it stood the test of time.
Yeah.
I think it's a tricky read in terms of a book based on when it was written. It's a bit of a tricky read, but it's the tool is so fantastic. I think it really sticks out today. I'm sure I'm going to be missing a couple of people in that loop. As you know, I love your book, Selling Transformed. I'm also a big fan of Matt Dixon. I like the Jolt
Okay.
Effect is his most recent book
Yeah.
about all the deals that are going to no decision. But the Challenger sale was really interesting to me because neither Brent Adamson or Matt Dixon, neither one of them were salespeople. So they
Yeah.
wrote the Challenger sale as pure researchers. And
Yeah.
so I definitely like facts and data. And then finally on the mindset front, I think there are a couple great folks out there that I really like. One is absolutely Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach.
Okay.
I've always seen a real close alignment between entrepreneurs and salespeople.
Yeah.
And Dan's a thought leader about mindset and pulling the best thinking out of you. And I've always
Yeah.
seen alignment as a entrepreneur, but also as a professional salesperson. I think his approach is really helpful.
So when you wrote your book, then you're sort of pulling together, sometimes maybe subconsciously, but you're pulling together
Yes, yes, for sure.
some of the best practices that you've observed, you've read about, as well as based on your personal experience as well.
Yes. I think that's a great point to bring up. Phil, for people like you and I that have been at a long time and read a lot of things, I do make an acknowledgement at the beginning of the book where I thank a long list of people.
You
And I
do.
do say, hey, listen, if subconsciously I've pulled something out here and didn't give you footnote credit, I'm trying to give you footnote credit here because who knows where I pulled something from.
Yeah.
And I think in sales, because a lot of, again, as I said, I see traces of strategic selling in kind of 60% of what I read, but it's not always called out that way.
Right.
But so I just wanted to be careful that when I'm doing it, I'm sort of covering my tail a little bit saying, hey, a lot of these ideas have been out there for a while. I'm just trying to curate them and then show practical application and then add our own unique ability to some of those things too.
Yeah. I think yeah, and it was a difficult question, I know, to ask you who's influenced you, because it seems to
And I hope I didn't miss anybody, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. I know.
Yeah,
It's a bit of an unfair question, but uh, what one of the things that I really liked about the reading of your book is the style in which you've written it. Um, it's very, to me, it's, I like the human touch, which you often
well,
bring
thanks.
in. But you've also got these tips, pro tips and things like that that you direct people to, and you've got these fantastic sort of aids in the book, and just really, it's really simple in a way, but it's not simplistic, I think, in the way that you've pulled it together. So, do you want to talk a little bit more about the way you
Sure.
decided to structure the book, and you know your intent with the book, I think, was to make it easy for people to be able to pick up and sort of apply some of the thinking.
Well, thank you again for those comments, Philip. So you're deep in this space as well, and you understand. When you first started doing this 10 years ago, for me, I'm in a beautiful boardroom filled with people, and but it's the first time I'm sort of sharing some of my ideas, and I may have thought at that time that complexity was impressive. And
Yeah,
so I was almost trying to run sales workshops as if I had, you and Andy Paul and Frank Cespedes sitting in the room. And I'm trying to show how deep my thinking and how complex my thinking could be. And that's what we used to do in the early days. And it was too complicated
yeah,
because our friend Herman Ebbinghaus from 1884 in the Forgetting Curve, his philosophy is, his model still works. People have a hard time remembering things. So it feels to me that over the last 10 years, what we really did was continue to refine and refine and refine. So we break it into a simple concept that can be applied. And then when we wrote the book, and this book really learned to love selling, if we think of the three stakeholders that we train to today, we train leaders, we train salespeople, and we train SDRs and BDRs doing demand generation. And we have unique and different curriculums for each of them.
Yeah,
This really is the curriculum for the salespeople.
correct.
And so, what we tried to do is say, if somebody picks up this book, we're going to share all of the tools we use in the workshop. We're going to try and share a concept, but then allow them to do a little work in the concept. So maybe the concept will resonate. And then we'll try and give summary tips that make it easy to go back to the work and try and remember. So the idea was trying to package up the content of a workshop in one book that's easy to read, hopefully a little fun to read, and then all the old Mark Twain. I took additional time to write you a short letter. Hey, I wrote you a long letter. If I had more time, I would have written you a short letter. We did try and write the short letter with this book.
Yeah. 100%. And I know that a huge amount of thought has gone into the way that it's been structured. And yes, I can vouch very much for everything you've said. It is very simple to read. It's a nice read,
Oh, thanks.
and it's very practical. I think I use the word. It's precise and it's pragmatic, and it's that's exactly what it is. And I think it is a playbook. I think that certainly we shall be sharing the book as reading a reading source for the students going through our
Thank you.
graduate program as well. So it'll be on the reading list for them. So
Oh, thank you so much. That's
yeah.
great.
No, it's always good to, when you see something that's been very carefully thought, put together. And, so for us, it was, it's something that we would very much like to refer to. And, as we deliver some of our academic programs as well. So thank you for that. Okay. So, I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about the book, because I'd love to talk about the podcast and the channel that you have as well. And uh, I mean, I think what's interesting about your podcast series, which is you've gone in a different direction to us. You've gone out, and I think you've interviewed so many authors of different books. Well-known people, and uh, amazing to listen, to their stories.
Oh,
What
thank you.
what was behind the podcast? What made you decide to do it?
Philip, really, I think it was almost accidental again. So
Right.
with the podcast, I think we benefited a little bit from not knowing at all what to do. So we had a couple of conversations with a few people about before we started the podcast, and they were giving us advice like, "Hey, it's pure marketing. It's got to be a podcast 15 to 20 minutes. Keep it super short. Just very often fill out podcasts with just you talking, where you're sharing elements of what you do." And when I went away, Philip, I just thought, I'm not sure that's what I want to do. And so I think I tripped into it, where the first few podcasts that I had were with these authors. And admittedly, I was so scared before interviewing them. I had no idea what to do except study their material.
Mm,
And in many cases, they would have been authors where I'd already read one or two books, but I'd read all of their books
right.
and come into this thing with 20 questions and all these kinds of things based on it. And then what was happening was, these podcasts would be like this one, 45 minutes long or 50 minutes long. And we were getting advice from podcast companies that were producing it saying, got to shorten this thing. And you gotta talk more, Mark. Tell them about you and in the funnel and all the rest of it. But I didn't want to. I wanted to learn about the author because I was learning as I was going and certainly curious, and I just wanted a conversation. And then what happened, Phil, was over time after doing a whole bunch of these, it just became pure joy of my learning. But I think my learning is the listener learning also. And I'll ask those silly questions, based in ignorance, based on who I am. I've been hit in the head with a puck many times.
Yeah.
So, but it really is a total joy having authors like you, where you just have an enjoyable conversation for an hour, and maybe we edit it down to 45 or 50 minutes, but
Yeah.
now we've hit about 100.
Yeah.
I'm constantly amazed at who actually wants to join.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
once in a while, like Herman Simon from Simon Kucher and Partners, 36 books written on pricing strategy, the global thought leader in this space, reaches out to us to
Yeah.
say, "Can I be on your podcast?" And I'm almost sending him a note back saying, "Are you crazy? Do you know what the podcast is? Do you know what you're asking for? Why would you do this?"
Yeah.
It's just been, pure joy, and it just continues. We just keep getting amazing guests, and we'll have to have you back on again, because
Well,
it's just super fun. But it almost becomes this hour to take, to capture somebody's book, learn some key lessons, find out what they're thinking about, who do they
correct.
love, what are they reading. We've just been super blessed with the feedback we've had on the podcast, and it's just a real joy to run it.
Yeah. I think for our listeners as well, I would thoroughly recommend that you tune in to Mark's podcasts. They are brilliant, and it's a great place to go to actually get research from some of the latest writers on sales and related topics as well. In the show notes, we'll for sure being
Oh,
um,
thank you.
putting the links for our listeners, but it's absolutely fabulous.
And
Mark,
and Phil,
what if I? Oh, sorry, Mark. Yeah, sure.
can I throw that question back to you, Philip? So
Yeah,
why do
sure.
you love doing? Clearly, you love doing this. It comes across. The last one I watched, I'm catching up on some of yours, but I saw the amazing fellow from SAP about AI. That was just such
Yes.
a valuable podcast.
Yeah.
Why do you like running the podcast so much?
Um, well, because we're a sales for very much the same reasons as you, Mark. That I really enjoy um, I really enjoy talking to people who focused on a particular area, and like you learn so much from them. So I would say for the similar reason, for curious, I,
Yeah.
I'm doing it for that. And but the other is that I wanted to give a platform to the unsung heroes, if you like, of sales.
Oh,
The practitioner, the people out there grafting at the sharp end. And what we have with the business school is we have amazing people who, are doing these dissertations and master's projects. And now we've got quite a number going through to do doctorates. And it's absolutely mind blowing looking at how they're learning to study a topic in in a huge amount of detail. And I think they've got an awful lot to give. And I think what makes it very authentic is that these are not academics observing the sales profession.
yes.
These are people in the profession who've taken a piece of work that they're passionate about and studied it, and they come across as real authoritarian, no, or no, they're not experts, if you like, on
Yes.
a particular topic. So for me, it's partly giving them a platform to be able to take. We have this concept of I, we, and the greater we. So the I is I, the we is the team, and the greater we is to the profession. So
Yes.
giving
Love
someone
it.
who's come in with this sort of I mindset. Sales arguably is a very sort of selfish, sort of individualistic profession. Of course, it's not, but a lot of people think, maybe come into sales for that reason.
Mhm.
Um, but it's the actual development of the community, and it's giving people the chance to flourish in a way, And if the podcast can help them do that, I'm all for it, and hopefully it'll help them with their careers in a way, and as well as helping the people listening into the podcast to kind of learn more. But there are authors out there like Frank, Frank Suspides, who in fact I interviewed the other day,
Oh,
based on
fun.
listening to him on your podcast, actually, Mark.
Oh, fantastic. Great.
He's, yeah, I agree with you. But what I've done is I've gone into his more recent book, and we've just taken 2 chapters, and we've just done a deep dive on 2 chapters, and there'll be more to come. Um, but no, and I also quite like the eclectic nature of some of the people that we have.
Yeah.
Sort of 3-star generals in the army, or psychotherapy experts or whatever. People is somehow you can pick up an idea learned from another profession, but actually applied to the world of sales. So, yeah, I think it's trying to be a place for slightly eclectic conversation, um, mainly through people who are practitioners, but occasionally with people from outside. But
Yeah.
I do think that we probably should take a leaf out of your book and broaden perhaps the people that come on the podcast and include some authors as well, or more authors on it. But no, I think it's similar to you, Mark. I think yeah, we're motivated by the same things, which is what I've loved about the way that we've engaged together. In
Yeah, me
different
too.
ways on the podcasts, and yeah, and so on.
I think there's this, well, first of all, bravo on the podcast. Love all of those reasons, and it becomes so compelling. And I think the folks here, like listening, can feel that in your podcast, Philip. You have an
Mm,
energy and an enthusiasm and authentic curiosity that comes across. Like, this has just been a wonderful discussion,
yeah.
which I really appreciate. So I'm looking forward to working with you in other ways in the future for sure.
Yes. Can we finish off with one final question, Mark, if that's
Please,
okay? Mark,
please.
how do you see the future? What's the future? For for you. I'm really interested to know, and yeah, just love to know where this is going for you.
So there's 2 paths. So I may be on that global stage playing the O2 Arena,
Okay,
opening for Pink Floyd. Let's not take that off the table, Philip. That could
that's
still happen.
great. That's great.
So that's gonna. I think moving forward in the future, here's what I would envision 10 years from now. I would envision for most countries, there's a single standard professional sales certification so that when somebody comes out of college or university, it is the world's most sought after profession and they have somewhere to go to get certified as a professional. So I think before we're done, I believe 40 or 50 years ago, that's exactly what happened. But the certification came from companies like Xerox or Kodak or Motorola, but but it doesn't exist anymore. So the largest technology companies did not pick up the mantle and they're not focused that way. Back in those days, they would hire 15 people, and 3 months later, 9 months later, there was 14 of the 15 were still there. I think with
Yeah,
technology companies today, they hire 15 people, and a year later, there's 5 of them. So I think there's this standard form of professional sales certification, no different than the way there's a standard project management certification. And so that's where I see things going. I see at some point in time a whole bunch of thought leaders getting together to make this happen who actually care about salespeople. They don't just care about selling books. They don't just care about filling training workshops. They actually care about the profession. And you can tell those people, and you're one of those people. So
sure.
that's where I see it, Philip. Now that might be pie in the sky, but that's where I see this going. And in the meantime, I see a community of folks focused on increasing the performance and professionalism of B2B sales so that the buyers start to feel it. They feel like the profession is elevating.
Well, I think we share the same kind of idea, Mark. I think you've taken it on to a sort of higher level. We've just looked at, the UK as an area and tried to build a standard here. But I would be thrilled if that were to happen. I think in Canada you've got some really interesting the work that Karen Piska is doing
Yes.
at the university over there. I think is terribly impressive. Loved sort of being connected with Karen as well. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm sensing that a lot of the alumni who are now our alumni getting into very senior management positions are going to help make this idea come to fruition.
I
Yeah,
think so too.
it won't be I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime, but I can see it coming, and I'm quite excited about it. But
Yeah, it'll be,
we should,
well, I hope it is. It will be in both of ours.
I
And
would, yeah, I'll be
yeah,
very pleased if it does.
and both of us are going to live to 150. I mean, longevity is looking very good these days. We're having lots of guests on longevity.
Yeah,
Philip, what a pleasure being on your podcast today. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for having me.
it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, cheerio then.
Bye bye.